Yeah. Yeah. Welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. It is the 14th of December 2020. I'm your host, Byron Pace, and this is our last podcast of the year. We do this every year where we have a bit of a break over Christmas and New Year, recharge, come back in January. So you can expect the next episode to drop. I'm not sure. It might not be probably not the first Monday of January, the second Monday of January. So to this show, we have an amazing conversation with three incredible women based in the States, Katherine, Caroline, and Louisa. Each of them are going to introduce themselves at the start and tell you a little bit about their background. But essentially, they are undertaking this amazing project to create this documentary and raise awareness of the problem of feral horses in the US. Now, I'm not even going to say any more than that. It's a really big problem. There's a lot of parallels with this. Don't think that this is just a US issue. Well, the actual issue is a US issue, but the lessons that can be learned from it in terms of wildlife management are applicable to so many things around the world. So I think you'll be able to draw a lot of parallels depending on what country you live in from this story. It's really fascinating. It was great to have three people, so four of us in total, on the show, but you're going to hear all about that. So I'm not going to give you any more information in the intro. But before we kick into that, as always, I need to say a massive thank you to all of the Patreon supporters. And in the top tier this week are Richard Stevens, Richard McNeil, Ronnie Speakman of rdcontracting.co.uk, Tom McCraith, James Benjamin Normandale, James Marchington, the guys at South Esher Stalking, Josh Starling, Thomas Cameron, Mark Zabrowski, and Galax Clothing, the team at Galax Clothing. What a really long top tier list. Thank you so much, all of you, and thank you so much everyone else who contributes in all the other lower tiers. It makes a massive difference, and it was nice to end 2020 with the most patrons that we've ever had. So that made me feel good. I sometimes forget to remind you all, but if you are a podcast listener, you get 15% off any of the publications on the Modern Huntsman shop. So if you head over to modernhuntsman.com, who are our partners on this podcast, you can have a look at volumes 1 through to 6. 6 is shipping now. As this podcast goes out, volume 6 is shipping. You can get 15% off just by using the promo code Into the Wilderness. As simple as that. There is also a whole heap of cool products on there right now that they've released with the gift guide. There's a collaboration coffee. That's one of the coolest things that's been released in the last 2 weeks, and a whole bunch of other things. Definitely go and check out. There's not a lot of time now between when this podcast goes live and Christmas, but there is time to get anything that's on the shop to you before Christmas. So head over to modernhuntsman.com, click the shop, and have a look at all the cool gear that's on there, as well as the publications 1 through to 6. I really hope that you all enjoy this really energetic and fascinating conversation between the four of us, and I look forward to joining you all again in January. Everybody, welcome to the Into the Wilderness podcast. This is a rare treat because I have not one guest, not two guests, but three guests. I've got Katherine, Caroline, and Louisa all on the line, all going to be speaking to me about this incredible project that you guys are involved in. But before we get to that, I think probably because there are so many of you, it's worth just giving a little intro, like who are each of you, and just tell me just a little brief bit about your background before we talk about this very cool documentary and actually a very interesting conservation conundrum that's currently in the US.
Great.
I can go. Oh, you go, Boucher.
Go ahead, Caroline.
Okay. It's hard because we all can't see each other, so we don't know who's about to talk. But my name is Caroline. I grew up in Los Angeles, and I currently live there still. I started riding when I was 5 years old, and I'm still riding now. I met Katherine and Louisa out in Wyoming on a dude ranch that we all worked at together. And I still live in LA, and I'm an artist there and working on some fun projects like this one.
That's cool. Do you have a studio in LA?
I do. Luckily it's an old converted garage in my backyard, which is really lucky. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. So, Katherine,
Yep.
what about you?
So my name is Katherine Boucher. I grew up in Vermont, and that's where I am right now. And I started riding when I was about 9 at a summer camp, and I kind of just never stopped. And like Caroline said, I met Caroline and Louisa at a ranch in Wyoming, and that's actually where I still work. I'm the head wrangler for this guest ranch. And I'm involved in this really great project with the two of them.
So there's going to be a couple of times where I'm going to have to ask you guys just to like expand on things which you think are very obvious, because although we have a lot of listeners in the US, I think probably about half the people who listen to this podcast are in the US, everyone else is in the rest of the world. And also they might, although they're probably in, well, I don't think you'd be listening to this podcast if you weren't intrigued in the great outdoors, but they might not be horsey people. So when you say head wrangler, what are you referring to there?
Yeah. So I run the riding program for a guest ranch. So basically manage the riding program for a ranch where people come and stay for a week and basically go out on trail rides while they're there.
Oh, fun. And Louisa, what about yourself?
My name's Louisa Banky, and I'm currently in Durango, Colorado. But I grew up in Massachusetts on the East Coast. I started riding horses when I was 8 years old, and I just graduated college in Durango with an outdoor education degree. So I'm also very passionate about backcountry skiing, rock climbing, fly fishing. I
love it.
being in the outdoors, but I also really love riding horses.
So clearly all have a passion for the outdoors, all have a passion for horses. Explain to me this project, because this was when you reached out, I can't remember who it was that actually, I think, was it you, Katherine, that reached out to me originally?
Yep.
Yeah, how did you, interesting question. I mean, how did you come by the podcast? Was it through, I know that you're a reader of Modern Huntsman, was it through them?
Yeah, it was. I was just looking all over their website. I had ordered the, I think it was the second volume. It was the public lands volume because of the wild horse issue in it.
Of course.
Which I thought was a great article. It was really different from everything that I've seen about the wild horse problem. But anyways, I was looking through the website and found the podcast and started listening and thought, hey, it'd be really cool if we could talk with Byron.
Yeah, absolutely. This is really interesting because it's a topic that I didn't know really anything about, that I've been educated on through that article that you're referring to, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, Charles Post wrote. And he has since put out a film, I might butcher the title, I think it's Horse Rich, Dirt Poor, and which kind of covers the topic. And I know that you've mentioned in other interviews and stuff, some of the inspiration is that quite well-known documentary called Unbranded. But tell me, I don't know who's going to kick off on this, but tell me about this project that you are all involved in and pushing for. And then we can maybe dig into the details of what the issues are with wild horses in the US and what the history is there. But what was it that drove you to want to kickstart this project, which is ultimately going to be an amazing journey and a documentary, which I think, if I'm not mistaken, should have been done this year, but I guess like everybody else, COVID has ruined your plans.
Boucher, you want to take this?
Sure.
Or Louisa?
Yeah, I can talk. So it was supposed to be this year, which we were really sad to put it off for a year, but it actually worked out really well. It just gave us more time to plan and get things together. But the project itself, I guess the way that it started was that Louisa came to me when she was working at the ranch one summer, and she said, I have this great idea. I think we should do sort of what Unbranded did, but like a female version of it. And she said, do you want to come? And I was like, well, yeah, of course. That sounds awesome. Like, let's do a big pack trip and talk about the Mustang issue. So that's kind of how it started. And then that same summer, Caroline came to visit the ranch later on, and we sort of invited her to come along too. So that's how we all got together. And the project itself, we decided to do, we're doing a 40-day pack trip, and we'll be riding through southern Wyoming and northern Colorado. and we will be adopting 11 Mustangs in May and riding them on this journey. And then we'll be filming it and making a documentary to sort of talk about the Mustang problem, but trying to keep it as unbiased as possible. I think there's so much emotion behind the Mustang issue, so we're just trying to keep it more factual rather than one-sided one way or the other.
Cool. So the journey is a way for you to tell the story in a way that possibly hasn't been told before. But can someone maybe just backtrack a bit here and give us background on what the wild horse issue is in the US and why this is such a controversial topic?
Sure. It is so interesting because it is multifaceted. Basically, wild horses are, their population is doubling every year. And the US government doesn't really know what to do with all of these horses that are on rangelands or on BLM land. So what they're doing is rounding them up and putting them in holding facilities, which are basically where these horses are just sitting in big fences together and not being used for anything. Or there's adoptions also where we'll get our Mustangs, where people can look at horses and adopt them, but it's a little bit less common. And then on top of that, you have other groups of people, including ranchers and animal rights activists, kind of going at the issue in different ways. Like ranchers are concerned because Mustangs are competing with their livestock, and they make a living off of selling beef, and they're having a tough time having Mustangs coming in, grazing on their lands and drinking their livestock's water. And then you also have these animal rights activists that are really concerned that horses are going to slaughter, but they don't see the full issue of the Mustangs because since they're overpopulating, they're taking resources. But it's also interesting because they're a symbol of America. They're introduced so early on. So there's a controversy between is it an animal that we protect and we we protect the spirit of the Mustang, but at the same time they're also rounding them up and putting them in holding facilities, which seems a little bit disrespectful. So it's kind of a double-edged sword with a lot of different groups with different opinions, a lot of emotions. And honestly, the more I read about it, I don't even know where I stand on the whole thing. It's very complicated.
It looks very complicated. And it's a really interesting thing because my understanding of Mustangs in the US is that you had wild horses there historically going way back, tens of thousands of years, but then they were basically wiped out. And then they were reintroduced by the Spanish. So they're not, it goes back so far that they're classed as native, but really they're not, although they were native horses there. With any other overpopulation of animals, there is, particularly in the US, where there's a big culture of wildlife management through hunting activities, they would simply be managed by taking a surplus and leaving a certain amount to carry on breeding and proliferate in the species, but at a level where it wasn't negatively impacting the habitat for other wildlife. Because I know you mentioned ranches there, I know that in some instances it's not just about this competition with people and our use of the land, it's also a competition with other wildlife that lives in the same areas. But I guess with horses, it's a difficult one because most people see them as purely a domestic animal. So this idea that we would round up a whole bunch of them and then just send them to slaughter to manage the population that way, I guess is very uncomfortable for a lot of people.
That's actually something you brought up, management of other wildlife. And that's something that I personally think about a lot, and I don't really know the answer to this question, but I think it's really interesting how in America we are really used to the idea of having hunting permits given out as a way to sustainably manage wildlife population. So there are hunters who will say like, oh, hunting deer is great for the environment and for the population of deer because it keeps things in check. But these same people, a lot of them would have a really big hesitation with hunting a wild horse. And I think a
Yeah.
lot of that,
Yeah.
it just doesn't really sit right with a lot of us, which is really cultural because a lot of other cultures do eat horse meat.
Yeah, the
And
French love it.
yeah, and I personally don't eat meat, so I'm like, no thanks for any of it. But for me, I also don't see how, we make such a big cultural deal out of, oh my God, it's a horse, it's so beautiful. But, you could technically say the same about it's a deer, it's so beautiful running free, right? And yet there's this really strong aversion to hunting a wild horse, which I think puts us in a difficult place because that's potentially a way of managing this population problem. And yet it's really unpopular to talk about, which I don't really know the answer, but I just think it's interesting to think
The
about kind of,
dynamics of it.
yeah, and why we look at different animals differently.
Yeah, it's that cultural element of it is fascinating because I mean, I've eaten horse before when I've been in different countries where you see it on the menu in some
Right.
places, and it's not a big deal at all.
Right.
I can't imagine anybody that I know who would want to go and hunt a wild horse, but I understand it, but equally, I almost wonder whether it could be seen as more of an opportunity to just provide protein and utilize it as a wild food source, maybe not through hunting, but in a more kind of managed sort of semi-wild agricultural way, like they have been doing with rounding them up. And then I don't know what happens to all those horses that are being essentially being put down. Are they being eaten or turned into pet food or?
There was a period of time where they were turned into dog food most often. But then activists got really upset about that. And there's now some rules in place that limit the amount that you can buy/adopt at a time so that it kind of discourages people from just taking them directly to slaughter. But, there's a lot of controversy about that too, because some people say that it's still happening. Some people say that it should happen because maybe death is better than just standing around in this filthy pen for the rest of your life. If you're a wild animal, is it more of a humane end to your life to just end it? Or should it be dragged out standing around in a small pen, not able to run or do anything wild? And again, I don't know the answer, but yeah.
I guess it's because and I know you talk about this in the short sort of show reel for the project that you're all involved in, is they're seen as an icon, particularly an icon of the West. And this idea of how could you treat an American icon like that, I guess goes to a lot of the root as to why people feel uncomfortable about it. But ultimately, there needs to be some sort of a solution, but for decades now, no one seems to have come up with a solution. I saw a crazy number. I think it was on your website that there would be, was it 500,000?
Yeah.
By 2030?
There's currently 95,000 just roaming on public lands. And that does not include the number that are in holding facilities. There's, I think, over 50,000 now in holding facilities. So, there's like over 100,000 horses that are just unaccounted for, basically, that don't really have a purpose right now.
And someone has to feed them and look after them.
Right. That is through our taxpayer money.
Yeah, and this again goes to the problem, and much of what gets brought up is why, if there's no end, if there's not really like an end game, why are these animals being paid for day after day if they're not going to be really used for anything? And my understanding is that although there is an adoption system there, that can't keep up with the number of horses being brought in.
No, definitely not.
Do you, Katherine, do you have kind of, this is obviously is a problem that needs to be resolved, and the project that you guys are working on to raise awareness of this problem is hopefully going to bring it to the forefront of people's minds so that a solution can be found. But do you have a view on what could be done here? Because the thing that I find really interesting here is that the conversation so far has been very pragmatic. But you all love horses. You all work with them all the time, and you ride horses. But you're very aware of the issue at hand here, and maybe the difficult choices that need to be made.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the hard thing is we all obviously love horses, but sometimes you kind of have to do hard things in order to make things better in the long run. And I think part of where we are at with wild horses right now comes from a really well-intentioned place of trying to protect them, because there was a period of time where they were getting hunted down and rounded up a lot and really getting sent off to slaughter, and their numbers were dwindling at one point in time. And some well-meaning people introduced these laws to protect them, and they ended up kind of putting them in this uncomfortable place where they're both protected, and also because of the protection they're suffering because their populations are growing too much, and they're kind of hurting themselves because they're overgrazing. And so what we thought was good intentions ended up backfiring a little bit. So I think the three of us, while we do love horses, we kind of have this bigger picture idea of it, seeing that maybe we might have to do some hard things in order for things to be better in the long run, which is kind of the reverse of what happened before, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Louisa, can you speak a little bit to the kind of environmental impact? I mean, we've touched on it, but the real hard environmental impact that this number of wild horses out there on these public lands is actually doing, and what we talked also about the conflict with ranchers, but what the conflict with other wildlife is, and what we are seeing. What is the impact that we're visually seeing from it? Because I know just from actually when I was watching Charles's film, I mean, even for them themselves, for the horses themselves, there's not enough water and there's not enough food. So I imagine that the other wild animals that live there as well are also really struggling because of this overburden of population.
Yeah, kind of what Caroline touched on. It's just overgrazing. It's kind of creating this like dust bowl in areas that they're living because they need to move to find water and find food. And they're also competing, especially with other ungulates in the area, like deer. So deer are unable to find food. And most of the horses are living in areas like Nevada, where you'll see it's super desolate because they're also competing, like I said, with humans, which is interesting. So they're kind of getting pushed into desert-like areas where they can't survive very well because they're eating themselves out of certain areas, and they're also getting pushed out by buildings and people spreading pretty far out into areas as well. And then we also have a really weird way of, especially compared to Europe, we have private land and then we have public land. So all these horses are getting pushed onto BLM or public lands. And
just define BLM for people outside the US.
Yeah, so BLM, it stands for Bureau of Land Management. And those are areas that are, it's considered to be public land, and it's taken care of by the government. But in a sense, these wild mustangs are getting pushed onto areas of this public land that are just super desolate without any water and without any resources. So they're dying off in those areas and then moving into different areas to find food. So it's kind of creating like a pattern of them depleting resources in areas.
And just to go off of that a little bit too, Louisa, because there's so much overgrazing, there's also like invasive plant species that are coming in because that isn't being eaten by those animals. So things like cheatgrass are getting more prominent out west because of the overgrazing.
And that's like a really non-nutritious food. So like I don't think any animal can really survive off of cheatgrass.
No,
So
I
that
don't-
in turn affects everything down the line. Yeah.
Yeah, and it really takes over quickly. I know that one of the issues with the conservation of your sagebrush ecosystems is the invasion of cheatgrass as well. So yeah, it's interesting that for an invasive species, this overgrazing actually helps that proliferate, which is a whole other problem and quite difficult to reverse once it takes hold, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Something that you just brought up there, which just was making me think when you were talking about like the animal rights element of it, of being upset or riled about the idea of horses going to slaughter and being used for whatever that might be. Pet food was the previous example. It's interesting to me that is more of a focus than the actual sort of animal welfare of these animals in the place that they're existing, where somebody can be really outraged as to the outcome of an animal's life ending, but not be as outraged about it living in really either I was going to say terrible environment when they're in pens, but I haven't seen them, so I can't speak to that. But I imagine it's obviously not as comfortable, wild and free as when they're just out on the open plain. But even when they're free, they don't have the resources, and these horses are starving in many cases and are really not in great shape. And this sort of contradiction between people being outraged by the human interaction at ending an animal's life, but not being as outraged about these animals suffering, doesn't quite compute in my mind. As somebody who, I hunt and I fish, and I have a good sense of animal husbandry just from keeping I live on the edge of a farm, so I see farmers on a daily basis dealing with their livestock, but I've kept a lot of animals over the years as well, and I have this understanding of sort of the lesser evil and removing suffering where possible. Right. It's a difficult and interesting contradiction that.
Yeah, I think part of it honestly comes from the fact that right now a lot of the people who are so passionate about this issue, there's a lot of people, so I'm in Los Angeles, there's a lot of people in California and LA that are like so rightfully moved by Mustangs because they are beautiful animals, and yet they know so little about the realities of it because it's so out of sight here. We don't have run-ins with Mustangs on a daily basis. And that goes for most of America. Most Americans don't have run-ins with Mustangs or see them firsthand or know anything other than, the kind of myth around them. So it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. Whereas, okay, if it's in dog food, it must have suffered to be there. So like, that's a hard fact of like, that's not good. But if you don't know what's going on in the wild, quote unquote wild, or these pens, you might not know the reality of it. And so you might think that that's better because, well, they're not dog food. So I think it's kind of this, I can't find the right word, but they just don't, it's out of sight, out of mind. So our hope by having this project is to kind of show people the whole picture so that they can maybe make a better judgment in terms of what you were saying. Like sometimes it's better to just make that decision in order for the general welfare to be improved rather than just drawing it out.
Yeah, no, I see that. And a lot of it does come down to education and understanding. I'm seeing some parallels here with the way that you're just describing that with some parts of the world making decisions on like trade bans, for example, to affect things that are happening in other countries. Africa is one that comes up quite a lot when they're talking about trade bans of particular animal products. But from the outside, with very little understanding, it sounds like a great idea. Oh, we can help save a species by banning an international trade on it, without really understanding what's going on the ground and the people who live there and the environment that these animals live in and how those systems are actually funded sometimes relies on this sustainable trade. But on a surface value of it, just seeing these charismatic wild animals, I can understand why it's easy to make this emotional connection and decision that making those difficult choices is something that doesn't seem necessary and seems cruel when why can everything not just live wild and free? So yeah, that was one of the things that I found fascinating about what you're hoping to achieve when you take this amazing journey. And I want you to talk about this journey a little bit more now, is to really uncover this story in a very open and honest way. Because in my mind, education and really showing people what's happening on the ground is the only real way to have these discussions in a constructive manner. Because without all of the pieces, without all of the information, you can't really expect people to be able to view these very complex topics in a complete way. Tell me a little bit more about this journey, because it sounds like the kind I can't ride, but I have ridden. But this sounds like the kind of journey that I would love to be a part of, because it sounds fantastic. 30 days on horseback,
40.
going through the wilderness. 40 days,
Yeah.
going through the wilderness. Tell me a little bit more about this route and how you're going to keep supplies for that long, and what the whole process is going to be like, because there's 3 of you, but there's going to be 12 horses. So yeah, just talk me through that. I'm fascinated.
Sure. Yes. So we will be leaving next October to go on 40 days in the wilderness through central Wyoming and northern Colorado. And we're going to be riding through HMA areas, which are areas where Mustangs live on public lands. So it'll be very interesting to be riding Mustangs while also seeing Mustangs as we're in their natural state. So in terms of, packing out this trip and doing, having enough food and re-rationing, we'll pretty much bring everything we need in terms of gear with us. And we'll pack out all the food before we leave. And then we'll have re-ration spots. So we'll have places where, we'll have a support team outside the field. And then they'll meet us in places probably once a week or once every 2 weeks to re-ration us with food, gear, food for the horses, whatever we need in terms of gear at the time. Yeah, and then the filming will be pretty interesting too. I don't really know as much about that side, because they're going to have to take a bunch of equipment with them as well, which they'll need new batteries to come into the field.
I know this challenge.
Yeah. I'm just less clear on that. It seems really hard though.
It's possible. The great thing about technology now with filming is that everything is a lot smaller than it used to be, and a lot of things can be charged just by USB from battery packs. I did 12 days just by myself filming in the mountains in Mongolia, just with 2 small battery packs with solar panels, just topping everything up. And I was able to keep up with the top up, so I was only ever 2 batteries down at a time. So it is possible. So I just want to clarify something. So you're going to adopt these 12 horses, and you're going to be riding. Are these the ones that you're also going to be riding on this journey, I assume?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes, they are.
So what's that whole process like? Because you're adopting essentially a wild horse. How long does it take to break a horse into a place that you can actually ride it on a journey like that?
Yeah, so it's interesting, because originally when we started this whole thing, we had wanted to adopt very, wild feral horses and train them from the ground up. And we actually decided in the end that we more wanted to focus on the problem, the Mustang problem, and spend more time on that than the training process wasn't as important for us. So we're actually going to be buying Mustangs that are already started in their training. But to answer your question, in terms of starting horse training and being able to ride it, it really depends on the horse. Some of them, it takes just a couple of days to be able to, touch the horse. And sometimes it takes up to weeks to be able to touch the horse. So it just totally depends. I mean, just like people, they have personalities, and some are more trusting than others. So it can be a pretty lengthy process, or it can be not so lengthy. But we'll be buying our horses already trained to a certain extent, but not probably not very trained. We're trying to buy younger horses so they won't have a ton of experience.
So when are you doing that?
We are buying them in May. There's an auction in Wyoming at this place called the Wyoming Honor Farm, and it's an inmate program. So the inmates help train the horses, and they do this big auction, and I think it's twice a year, but we'll go in May and adopt our horses then.
Oh, okay. So then you've got from May through to October for you to get comfortable with the horses and the horses to get comfortable with you.
Yeah. Yep.
So we are currently right at the start of December. So if everything had gone to plan, this journey would have been over now, and you would have been, I guess, you would have been planning on putting the documentary together and what have you. Has anything changed? Apart from the time frame, has any of your plans changed, or has the extra time allowed you to think about things that you maybe wouldn't have been able to do, or you're going to do things differently just with the extra time to think about it?
I think the main things that have changed have really just been on the more of the production and filming side, to be honest. I don't think Caroline and Louisa, you can jump in here too. But I think mainly just like having more time for our producer to like plan for us, which I think was very good for.
Yeah.
I think other than that, like our trip itself hasn't really changed. I think other than that, it's pretty much the same.
I mean, one big change obviously is just global, the pandemic. So being careful about that. But luckily our trip is so small that we should be able to do it really safely without having to worry too much about it. So it hasn't really changed it. It's just more of an awareness in our heads.
Sure. Well, hopefully by then we're all vaccinated, so you won't have to worry about it anyway. Yeah. I mean, that's my hope, so that travel's a little bit easier than it has been. What was the process like? So once you decided that you were going to wanted to do this journey and make this documentary, to tell this story, who did you approach and how did you go about trying to turn this into a documentary? Because I know, being that's a world that I'm also involved in, like how difficult that can be, not only pulling in the right people, because it's so important that you actually have cohesion between the people who are in a film and the people who are behind the cameras and producing it and everything, but also just trying to fund something like that is an absolute nightmare. How have you guys gone about it?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely, the three of us are not film people at all. We're just horse people, and we thought this would be a fun project and something important to talk about. And we feel like we have gotten so lucky because I was introduced to someone here in LA who is an amazing director, and he was really interested in our project. And he's not a horseman at all, but he's really passionate about helping us, and he thought our idea was great. So we started working with him. He helped us make our pitch video for our crowdfunding campaign because we knew we would.
Which is lovely. I really enjoyed that. It's really well done.
Yeah, like I said, he is so talented. We planned it out together. We went out to Wyoming last summer to film that. He put that together for us. We used it for our Seed and Spark campaign. So we did a crowdfunding through them, which we raised.
What is Seed and Spark? I don't actually know.
So Seed and Spark it's kind of like a GoFundMe or like a Kickstarter, but it's specifically for filmmakers. And one of the cool things about them is they let you keep your money if you get to 80% of your goal. So with some of the other ones, you have to get 100% or you get nothing. And with Seed and Spark, it's film oriented, and also you can get to only 80% and still get your money. So for a film like ours, we knew we needed a lot because not only is the filming part expensive, we also have to feed and care for 11 horses and get all the gear to ride them and gear for us. So we have a very large budget. So we were lucky enough to be able to raise $52,000 or so through that campaign, which was amazing. Yeah, our community.
Well done.
Thank you. Our community is amazing. We just every time we have something like that or interact with our community, we're just blown away and so grateful.
How on earth did you promote it to so many, clearly to so many people to raise those kind of funds? Was it just through going on podcasts and writing articles and social media? Is that how you did it?
That, and then Instagram has been huge, which Katherine is like Instagram wizard. She posts these amazing posts. And so
what is your Instagram handle?
It's at Women in the Wilderness Film with underscores between every word.
Okay.
But I'm sure if you search Women in the Wilderness Film, it'll come up. But that was a huge one for us. And then just honestly, between the three of us, we had this huge Google Doc. Again, Katherine is like amazingly organized. So we have all these Google spreadsheets of like, who do we know? How do we know them? Have we reached out? And just doing a ton of emails, just saying like, hey, I know you're interested in horses, or I know you're interested in the outdoors, or whatever it may be. And then explaining our project and hoping that that person would support us. And in a lot of instances they did, which was amazing. And we're very, very grateful. And just continuing what feels like, the universe kind of nudging us in the right direction is we were introduced to this amazing producer in LA also. And she has amazing connections, connected us to like a good DP who I think he lives in Wyoming. He's just awesome, like outdoorsman, is like ready to jump into this at any moment. So just through this web of connections, we've managed to assemble this team that is just really cohesive and passionate, and we all have a lot of fun when we're together. So it's a good sign because, we're going to be spending a lot of time together. So we have to get along, and luckily we do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really important factor when you're spending so much time out without much support.
Yeah.
If people want to find out a bit more about what you guys are doing, and is it still possible to support the project?
Yes, absolutely. We are partnered with Wyoming PBS. They're our fiscal sponsor.
The TV channel. PBS.
Yeah. So they're our fiscal sponsor, so you can donate through them and get like a tax write-off, and then the funds will go to us. That's one way. We have some information about that on our website, which is womeninthewildernessfilm.com. If people want to get involved that way, that's amazing. We definitely need all the help we can get. We also have a matching campaign with an anonymous donor that we started back in, I believe, the end of February or March, but we paused it because of COVID. We are hoping to restart that in around February, hopefully, of 2021. And that's a great opportunity to donate because everything you donate will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So we have the opportunity to raise $20,000 additional more dollars. And I know it sounds like a lot, but for all the filmmakers out there, how expensive even stuff like batteries are and lenses, and
it adds up.
It's insane. And then on top of it, all these horses and their shoes and saddles and replacement gear and sleeping bags for us. It goes on and on. So we have those opportunities coming up. So if people want to donate, every dollar, every penny is so appreciated. And we also can take gear if someone's like, oh, I've got a saddle sitting around that I don't use.
Oh, that's
Maybe
cool.
They could use it. If someone like that is out there, hears this and wants to reach out, we would love to hear from you.
Well, if most people I know who are into horses have a lot of gear, so I think there probably will be some gear out there that you can either have or loan for the period of time, and especially up in the north of the US, there's a lot of people who are into their horses. I spend quite a bit of time in Montana, and everyone I know there seems to ride. So.
Yeah.
Which is great. Just as a way to kind of bring this conversation to a close, and a question to kind of all of you. You're going to make this and you're going to put it out there for the world to see. Is there, what is your kind of hope for the future of wild horses and how we treat them, how we view them as a society? Because it certainly appears to me from the conversation that I've just had with you and from the reading of Charles's work in Modern Huntsman, plus the couple of films that do exist that have talked about it a little bit, that it feels incredibly sad and it feels incredibly cruel that we are not finding a solution quicker than we currently are, because ultimately there are a lot of animals out there suffering, I would say, quite unnecessarily, just because we can't come to a consensus of how to manage this situation. And I think one of the biggest mistakes is the idea that this is a situation that cannot be managed. This requires the input from humans to solve, because in some ways we have caused it. Do you guys have a kind of a view on what your hope is once you get to the end and sort of show the world the most honest reality of the situation that you can?
Yeah, I think my hope is that one, just kind of like you said, is that people just learn and are educated about what's going on. I think there's just a lot of people that don't know what the problem is, or that there is a problem. So my hope is that people are educated, and educated from all sides, that they understand why ranchers are upset, why animal rights activists are upset, why the BLM is having such a hard time managing it. So I think just education is a huge piece. And in terms of the horses, I just hope that, having them live on land and starving to death is not something that we want to see. And we don't really, want to see them standing in holding pens, because the whole purpose of protecting these horses is that they're living wild and free and happy. So I would hope that we can just find some balance in between the two of those.
Yeah, I agree. I think, I don't know, like you said, a lot of this suffering is unnecessary, and it is, humans brought the horse back to North America, so we do have a responsibility to these animals. So I guess my hope is that, like Katherine said, I want our viewers to have a more well-rounded understanding, so that maybe they can understand, okay, it makes me sad, for example, if some horses have to be put down, but I understand why. Or, there's other options too, besides, we keep talking about that, but there's also things like, birth control for mares, where it's temporary dart that you can shoot, and they are infertile for like 3 to 5 years or something, and then they're refertile after that. So there are loads of population control options out there, so that hopefully someone watches this film and they say, okay, I understand why they're doing that. I see that the future will be more sustainable because of it. And then ultimately, years down the line, I hope that there is a better balance where horses can exist, natural wildlife out there, the deer, other animals can exist, and humans can have respect for that, and just kind of more of a balanced thing with understanding and compassion on all sides.
That's fantastic. Louisa, I guess you get the final word on this.
I think that there just is so much emotion behind this issue. And I hope after people watch our film that they'll know why they feel that certain emotion, or they have some sort of standpoint on the issue. The more you learn, the more you know about this issue. And I just hope people can walk away and have an educated conversation about it. I don't know how long it will take, to have a solution, because it's such a huge issue and there's so many sides. But like Caroline had mentioned, I think PZP is a really amazing way to go. And it's also humane. And I think it's easier to swallow for especially these people that, like, we all believe in the Mustang being the spirit of the West, and kind of having a majestic appeal. I think PZP is an easy one to swallow. And I hope that, they could create more government jobs and pay people to stay with certain herds and dart horses. Just, in a more humane way. But I also see the other sides where we might need a few different solutions to the problem, not just one.
Yeah, it often is the way with these complex situations, is that there isn't a singular solution that can really help solve the problem, and it's like a multi-pronged attack to really get to the bottom of it. Because I suppose ultimately, as it stands, it seems that the population is too high anyway. So even if you're able to stabilize it through contraceptive methods, we still need to tackle the overabundance of the population that exists right now as it is anyway. All of you, Katherine, Caroline, Louisa, it's been fantastic to speak to you and really intriguing. And what a project. I love this. I love this kind of thing. It's the kind of documentary filmmaking that I personally enjoy being involved in myself. It's the kind of stories that I like watching. So thank you very much for sharing those insights with me and with our listeners today. And I wish you all the best of success as we get into 2021 and you can go forth and make this happen. And then maybe what we can do is after you've done the journey and the trip, you can come back on the podcast and tell us all about how it went in preparation for the film coming out in the months afterwards.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.